Hey everyone, welcome back to Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast. This is still season 2, and I'm still your host and producer, Danielle Terciano. Although I have to acknowledge, I do sound a little different today. No need for you to adjust anything. I just have my yearly cold. It came a little early this year, so I'm going to power through this recording with it, and hopefully I will remember to mute my microphone anytime I have to cough or sneeze so that I don't gross you all out at home. But the good news is, we record this virtually, so there's no danger of infecting my guest because, as you know, Made Possible by Pop Culture, that's a weekly podcast where I invite a guest on every episode. And basically, the guest is in charge of really picking what we discuss in every episode because they choose the pop culture influence from their past, either their childhood, early in their career, maybe a mix of both, that was most meaningful to them. We get into the what and the how and the why and all of that. Then we pivot to the present and we look at what is just as influential, maybe even inspirational to them today. And I'm going to admit something here. I created that present moment so that people could come on and talk about their current project, whatever it is that they're promoting today. And that's exactly what this episode is, because my guest, TV writer and producer Ed Herro. He's probably best known for American Housewife. That was an ABC sitcom starring Katie Mixon that ran for 5 seasons. But he has a new comedy out, 6-episode Amazon comedy streaming new on December 6th, which if you're listening to this in real time, as soon as I drop it, first of all, thank you. But second of all, that means it's out tomorrow. It's called The Sticky. It is based on the 2011 maple syrup heist up in Canada. Yes, a real life heist, but obviously liberties were taken because this is a comedy. So we're not going to get into too many spoilers because I don't want to ruin it before you all have a chance to watch it. But we are going to talk a lot about kind of how it came together and why it was an influence on him and why he wanted to tell this story. And maybe honestly, a little bit of the ins and outs of those liberties that he takes with it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this chat with Ed. Ed, thank you so much for coming on Made Possible by Pop Culture. This is a little bit of a different episode because we're going to talk about a show before it's actually out. So we're not going to get too deep into spoiler territory, but I mean, I feel like it must be something you've been working on for a while. Do you feel different knowing, hey, the world's about to see it? Like what is your excitement level / fear level?
It's actually odd because this is my show big,
Yeah.
thing. It's called The Sticky on December 6th on Prime Video. But it's been so long since I shot it or I even edited it because of the actors strike and the pandemic and all these things. I mean, I shot this almost 2 years ago. I stopped editing it almost a year ago. So
Wow.
it's been sitting there and Amazon's got to subtitle it for 200 languages or something.
Mhm.
It's just been a long process, so I'm oddly removed from it in a way, and I
Okay.
think that's helping my nerves. I'm not typically a nervous guy, but this could have overwhelmed me, I suppose, and I'm lucky enough in a way that I'm just kind of excited.
Are you at a place where you saw it obviously a million times when you were in the editing room? Have you been removed from it? Have you been not been watching it this whole time while you're waiting for it to come out? So maybe when it comes out, you'll be able to watch it with fresh eyes, or do you feel like no, that ship has sailed? There are no fresh eyes. I know the ins and outs too well.
I thought that I was kind of just done with it and I wasn't going to watch it. Not on purpose, I guess, but we had a premiere in Toronto 2 weeks ago or so, and I had not watched it since then. So I saw the first 2 episodes in a theater, and that was interesting. I didn't think I would have fresh eyes. I thought it was too ingrained in my body, but it was nice to see it again. And we're doing an event tonight in LA, and so I'll see it again with less fresh eyes, but still
Sure.
interesting.
Well, I mean, you see it again, but you're only seeing like what the first 1 or 2 episodes. So it's maybe it's not as much as, oh, I have to watch all 6 episodes 85 times.
But I will. I'm going to put it on my computer, just looping, hoping that Amazon realizes that.
Or in multiple devices because you
Oh,
have
that's
different
right.
IP addresses. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And maybe even different Wi-Fi networks. I'm not really sure what they track.
Oh
They're
boy.
really fancy with it. So obviously we are going to talk about the sticky in more detail, but I always like to go past to present just because chronologically I feel like the thing that you're going to talk about that was a big influence on you when you were younger a lot of the times I feel like very clearly informs the thing that we're going to talk about in the present in subconscious ways. I always like to ask that my guests set it up because I feel like your passion for it is a better descriptor than whatever I would say. So I do want to ask you just to like kind of set up for the audience, set the scene if you would, what you picked for your past influence, but not just like this is the show title. Talk a little bit about the first time you remember encountering it, if you can kind of put yourself back in younger you's shoes, how old you were, where you were, what was it that you feel like spoke to you in that moment?
When I was a little kid, Fox network was launching. I'm that old, and I was in my old childhood home in the TV room, and in the afternoons, like, again, this is dating me, but there used to be only three channels, really. I mean,
No, it's dating all of us. I'm right there with you. So this is why we do this because it's also kind of, hey, remember when we had to have, you know, sit there in front of it live or you missed it, like to kind of give different generations perspective on I will say how easy you have it now when there's easy but also overwhelming when there's so much choice and you can just
yeah.
leave it for later, but then if you leave it for later you never get to it. Anyway, that's maybe a different conversation.
Well, after school, Fox was running old reruns because they couldn't afford a lot of stuff. Married with Children was new, and that was like their big primetime show, and I think Simpsons was early on too. But they had a lot of like Leave It to Beaver old stuff that was probably just cheap and available. And I remember rushing home. I guess it wasn't the first time because I knew it was coming,
Mm,
and just hearing the whistle of the Andy Griffith Show theme song, and it was in black and white, which is still a throwback, but new to me because everything I was watching, Dukes of Hazzard stuff, was in
right.
color, and it felt very, very simple in the good ways, not in the bad ways, and reminded me a little bit of my mom's mom, my grandmother's town in Indiana, a small little town, and it just kind of struck a nerve with me or hit a chord. And it also had this father-son relationship, Andy and his son
Yeah.
Opie. Now, both my parents are alive and together in the show. That is not the case. But this this father-son relationship, about one-fourth of the episodes, and there's like 270 episodes over like 8 seasons. But they're like their father and son stuff. Opie's trying to do something or did something wrong, and it's just this very fatherly stuff. And that always stuck with me.
Mm.
I have three siblings and two parents, and we were always kind of known as literally the Cleavers. We had this like perfect little life in Wisconsin. It's not true, but that's how we
Well, but
appeared.
it's okay.
And yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of skeletons, but at the time, we didn't yell. We were very like just very kind and stuff. And so I guess that kind of drew me to it too. Here's a show that isn't like Married with Children or whatever was on at the time. It's just kind of wholesome. And although I rebelled against some of the wholesomeness my
Mm.
parents tried to instill in me, it was a comfort food then. I didn't know what that was at the time, and it still is. My wife knows that if I'm feeling down or blue, if she catches me watching Andy Griffith, because it's still like my chicken soup.
It's interesting to hear you say to bring up the like Married with Children was new at the time because Fox, like to sit hear you say you watch this on Fox takes me out of what Fox was because it was so known for like those edgier,
It
I
did
would
everything
say
it could.
almost anti-hero comedies. And this is such a, I mean, when Andy Griffith was new in the 60s, I think it was pretty common for that time for what it was in terms of, as you were talking about, like the wholesome, the family value stories, the like nice relationships with the lessons, but to juxtapose it in rerun or in syndication, I'm curious from because you brought up Married with Children, if it was almost like a bomb, if it was like you didn't really like the things that you were seeing at the time, and this kind of throwback was more what you were looking for whatever reason.
I mean, I do remember that I wanted to watch Married with Children in Three's
Okay.
Company and stuff, but I wasn't really allowed. I still saw it sometimes. So I don't think it was oh, I'm being, retreating against that. But it did have that even then, but even when it was first airing in the 60s, as you said, it was kind of nostalgic. I mean, Andy has been quoted as saying something like, even though it's shot in the 60s in present day, it
Mhm.
tried to be a throwback to earlier, like in the 30s.
Right.
And for whatever reason, it worked then. I mean, it was the number one show when it went off the air, which is just amazing. Um, but for me, what, 30 years later after that, it still hit me in the same way. And I still think it hits people in the same way. I have a 4-year-old son, and I'm now just this week I started watching them with him. And he loves it, but he likes anything on TV.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because I almost would think today's kids, they're so used to the bright colors, the like louder, flashier stuff, if they've had a lot of screen time, that I would think that maybe this would be too simple for them.
Well, again, he's 4, so
Oh,
even the Crooks one, with the bad guys, is a little scary for him.
okay, that's fair.
But also, I mean, I'm sure he has plenty of screen time, but we've tried to limit it. I know we pride ourselves on keeping it a little lower, and he knows it's important to me because I've talked about it, and so I think he just likes daddy time.
Bonding.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that. I think I like the idea that like this show is still able to do that because here's what you referenced this. You were like, it was 200 and something episodes. It was an 8 season long comedy. I'm not going to ask you to like pick any sort of favorite episode at this point because I mean, I'm sure you watch them out of order because you're watching them in reruns. It's a different experience, but you already referenced kind of the like father-son relationship. Um, do you feel like watching it when you were younger, were you internalizing those lessons? Like when these kids are doing whatever episode you want to point to, how much was it like, oh, I can also learn from this and take it into my real world versus I'm just watching this character go through something that maybe is not like anything I've gone through.
No, definitely the former. I mean, my dad is and was a very good father and very hands-on, but I guess there was something, maybe not missing is the wrong word. That seems like a disservice to my father, but I really did want those kind of moral lessons in the son,
Mm.
taking time with the dad taking time with the son to walk him through things. One of the episodes I love, and listen, I still sometimes get teary-eyed and cry on the Opie episodes. I mean, it's just he's so dear. But he accidentally once kills this bird with his
Mm.
slingshot, I believe, and his father is very upset 'cause he told him not to use the slingshot, but he says, now you have a responsibility. You left the little baby without a parent, so you have to raise that bird. And Opie does, of course, and then part of parenting is learning to let go. I'm already getting a little teary-eyed.
Yeah.
And Opie's sad and doesn't want to let it go, but then it does, it takes flight. And I remember watching it then. I mean, I bought all the seasons now. I have them all
Okay.
at my fingertips, but that just still resonates with me now. But I remember it resonating then. Like it it was teaching us about how not just to be a good kid or a good father, but a good human, I think.
Mm. So I imagine then you always identified most with him because like closer in age.
Yes, but I do honestly think it was Barney, the kind of the comedic sidekick that hooked me and kept me there. As
Okay.
I told you earlier, I really only I only really care about the first 5 seasons. That's
I
when
was gonna bring that up because I when I said 8 seasons, I was thinking, oh, maybe I should have specified we're purists here. You want to talk about five. That's okay. Five is still a lot.
yeah, Andy, Andy Griffith, who he plays Andy Taylor in the show, but Andy Griffith, so it's a little confusing. But Andy, the actor, Griffith, was already doing Broadway and movies and
Yeah.
stuff and some records and stuff. And it was very much like a Southern hick, it might be an offensive word now, I don't know, but like, it's kind of a
But like
naive,
the archetypal Southern, yeah, what you would
yeah,
think of, especially back then, as like a Southern guy.
yeah. And he kind of brought that in the first season. You can actually kind of see the evolution if you're watching it. He was a little more of that in the first season, then he kind of realized and got much more like just wise and like sage-like, and playing the straight man to especially Barney, but to
Mhm.
everyone. The whole town is kind of nuts, in a very endearing way. But I believe it was Don Knotts who plays Barney Fife, the
Yeah.
deputy, who, when he heard Griffith was going to do the show, reached out and said, you might need a kind of a funny slapstick guy, and he's just funny. I mean, I love Kramer from Seinfeld. I used to do up through college. I did a Don Knotts impression and a Kramer impression. I just love physical
Did you
comedy. Don Knotts is so good.
did you do Don Knotts as Barney Fife or Don Knotts?
Mostly, I mean, I always said just Don Knotts, but it was mostly Barney. I mean, he was also pretty famous in Three's Company in the later years. But yeah, I mean, just his deputy Fife, Barney Fife, is just so great and so um, full of just like fake bravado. I'm not sure how much you've seen, but most of the Barney episodes are him trying to act tough and getting in over his head, and then Andy trying to save him. And this couldn't have been a thing for me when I was first watching as a little kid, but I was a very late bloomer, and so
Okay.
I was small all through high school. And I think a lot of Barney seeped into me that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually knew not to do that because that was obviously a joke, but I tried to be tough, right? I took karate as a kid, and he always brags about karate.
Well, that's why I asked the question of like the relation, if you related more to Opie because he was closer in age, because I do think that sometimes when we watch these shows, we don't necessarily realize what we're taking from the older characters that we maybe then, as we get older, look back and go, oh, maybe I learned that correctly or incorrectly from something I saw. But I think also sometimes, or I'll speak for myself and I'll say I would often watch shows like this where I didn't want to relate to the kid character.
Hmm.
I wanted to find things that were similar in the adults to feel like, okay, I'll be that adult. I'm gonna try to like act more mature now, again, for good or bad reasons, depends on the show. Um, but it's also really interesting hearing you talk about the physical comedy aspect of it and like the gags that he would do because I feel like you're writing, especially in the show, the most recent shows, it feels more grounded. Like your characters feel like they can live in the world. So I don't know if this is even something you've really thought about, but just in terms of how much watching that type of humor growing up influenced the kind of comedy you wanted to write, to say, I do want to do that or I don't want to do that. I'm laughing at it, but I want to do something different.
Yeah, that's a great question too. I've never really wanted to write, the goofy neighbor, but I've always loved Don Knotts as a Kramer. I was I was really lucky. You kind of talked about like trying to level up yourself while
Yeah.
you're watching. I was lucky that my older brother, my only brother, but my older brother, he was he was subjected to comedy before me, of course, different types of comedy.
Yeah.
He introduced me to, Charlie Chaplin and Monty Python, before I would have ever found it on my own. And so I was so early on, and I just fell in love with that kind of stuff. Not that those are necessarily slapstick, but
Right.
Charlie's, I
Different
mean,
kind of humor
amazing.
for sure.
But, I know this about Andy Griffith, but Charlie Chaplin, now that I'm thinking about it,
Yeah.
I mean, that is a very, very, his comedy comes from a very dark place. Most of his stuff is him being a tramp, so
Yeah.
poor. The Kid, one of my favorite Charlie Chaplin movies, is about a kid just orphaned, and this tramp takes him in. That is, I mean, when the kid cries, it's still heartbreaking. And yet, in the 20s, he's balancing that with
Mm.
amazing physical comedy. I've always admired it, but I've never thought I don't know how you would write physical comedy. I'm just
Yeah,
like
no, I mean, it's a
something.
good question because I think, and I think that is something that a lot of comedy writers, especially like budding comedy writers now, they wonder like, well, if I want to write that kind of humor, how much do I even put in a stage direction in a script because I don't want to tell the director what to do because then they get mad. So like it does feel like it's a little bit more nebulous now than back then, but I also think it is maybe a little bit of a sensibility of like, I think if you hadn't grown up with those things, watching Charlie Chaplin as a young kid, understanding what was underneath I feel like it's a different level of watching something and of understanding something and then of saying, okay, I'm gonna now make my own thing. You have a deeper understanding for what comedy can do when you see that, what it has done.
Yeah, I think to be a really good comedian or a comedy writer, you have to, you know, immerse yourself in all of it to know what works for you, what works for the time. I mean, the industry has changed a great deal. There's very little wacky neighbor anymore in TV,
Mm.
um, which is fine. I look at the Seinfeld episodes. We watch those. My wife and I watch those a lot, almost every night now.
Yeah.
Uh, and who knows what Michael Richards was coming up with in the moment, or he'll exit a door and have two or three comedy moves, and I just don't think the writers put those in. I think he found
Mm.
them on the day or in rehearsal, and they're incredible. They're insane, but they're incredible, and I just love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also because when he has a live audience in front of him, maybe playing to the live audience, which you did not have with the sticky. So, I mean, you had a crew, obviously, but not quite the same level of, can I make this person laugh? Should I be making this person laugh right now, or should I just be delivering the lines as written?
Well, and really the only physical comedy in The Sticky is from Mike, the Boston mobster, played by Chris Demontopoulos, who's great. But we didn't write those things in. He actually played Mo in the Three Stooges movie.
Yeah, yeah.
He can do drama, he can do comedy, he can do everything. And he just found that stuff on the day. I
Wow.
mean, I don't know his process. Maybe he thought about it earlier, but like we were laughing when he did it because we didn't expect it.
Yeah.
And then Remy, played by Guillaume Cyr, he's pretty much me. I mean, he's a giant, but he's more or less little kid Ed, trying to be bigger than he is, and um, I just worked him in, but it made him very grounded and I don't think sad, but very vulnerable, which makes people kind of take want to take care of him.
I don't think I would have thought he was little kid Ed. So like hearing you say that now, I'm like trying to like go back in my mind. I just for everyone at home, I have seen the show. We will not be spoiling big plot points because we don't want to ruin the viewers at home's experience of watching the show. But like me just now having this little movie in my head being like, oh, which moments? But maybe they're spoilers.
No,
Um,
I don't even think it's moments. Mostly, I just more or less wrote him as my old self, and he wants to be seen as so much bigger and better than people have seen him. And I'm not saying he deserves it or not. I mean, I think he does deserve more than he's put down, but he just wants to be tough. I think in two scenes he's hitting this dummy to punch to feel strong, get his anger out, and that was very much me. I really wanted the dummy. I didn't have that, but I just wanted to be seen as strong and independent and capable. I wasn't as infantilized as he is in the show, but it's a lot of that stuff. Just his presence, his being.
for everyone who doesn't necessarily know a lot about what this show is, Remy is kind of the mastermind of this heist. So, it's based on a real heist that happened about 13 years ago, 2011.
Yep.
Wow, that in my head seemed like it was sooner than it really
Yeah.
was. And the show is set in 2011, so it's a little bit of a period piece. I want to talk about the influence of the real heist on you too. And like the idea of I feel like a heist is high stakes and I think you deliver high stakes, but I wouldn't have thought comedy. I would have thought like this could be a very serious drama. I mean, you took some change, you made some changes to like what, who and how and whatever. What was it then about the real heist that made you say, I want to tell the story, but I want to tell it my way?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my writing partner, Brian Donovan, he heard about it first. His sister married a Canadian, and he heard this thing at a Christmas party. And the great Canadian maple syrup heist, that sentence or headline is so catchy and intriguing. It's so stereotypical Canadian, but also anti-Canadian. It's just all these things mixed into one. And, he immediately told me about it, and we started researching. We read hundreds of articles, and the real crime was quite boring. The real crime is some people, there's to people who don't know, in Canada, there's warehouses full of maple syrup, in Quebec specifically, the province. And that is to kind of regulate the market. So if on a bad year, they can pump some of it in. On good years, they can hold it for reserve and keep the price stable and give farmers a decent living, they say. But a lot of people fight back on that. A lot of people don't like that. It's telling them how much they can sell. Like
Right.
if I take 100 gallons of syrup, who are you to tell me I can only sell 50? I need to eat too. I don't want to save for a rainy day. So the real crime was just a few people went into the warehouse at night. There's no security cameras, no guards, and they just took it slowly for months until someone noticed. That's terrible TV. That would be a terrible show. So
Yeah.
after reading all those
I mean, it
articles,
would be a terrible heist. Like, I think
yeah,
that show is then who are these people? What is the character drama? But I think then you have to heighten who these people are. Because I feel like in real life, they probably were just regular people, as you said, who like didn't want to be told how to run their own business, which I, for a minute, thought you were going to say the real crime was that they were being told how could run their business. I was like, yes, agree.
Well,
Politics.
right. So that's what we kind of got out of it when we looked at all the articles. It's like it's just I mean, it's very much the American dream in Canada. Luck turns out the American dream is universal. People just want to be able to work and have a decent life and improve themselves. And so, we just took, okay, who's the most underdog person to stand up for that? Who kind of embodies that? Well, a maple syrup farmer who's down on her luck for many reasons. You can watch the show if you want to learn more. So we have Ruth, that's set. She's kind of the principal. And who are we didn't want to just be one person. We wanted kind of a heisty thing. So who are the two most unlikely people to be with her? Who do you want to see bickering in a car together
Right.
about different things? And the beauty, I hope, is that all three of them want to steal this syrup, but for three completely different reasons. And their objectives get in the way of the others. So especially Mike, as you'll see, they have different outcomes that they want to achieve. And so they get in each other's way, either, outright or kind of behind the other's backs. I mean, Remy would be happy to just be caught in a way that he can still get more security people on his team, and then he gets to be a big man at his work. But yeah, making it a comedy. I mean, I come from a comedy background, so it kind of comes naturally. In fact, I told myself and Brian and we tried to actively not write jokes for them to tell. There's no setup punchlines in this.
Right.
Just trying to be as serious and specific as possible, and letting the humor come out of the circumstances and the characters. And, Ocean's 11 is a great heist movie, but it is so slick and clean and bright. And they're never in over their heads. Even when, as I recall, I haven't seen it in a while, even when it looks like it's going wrong,
Well, they set that up. Yeah.
Right. And that's a great movie. No complaints. But I didn't want to tell that story. I wanted to tell a story about real people who are just trying to accomplish something that seems impossible, but if you put your brain to it, you could maybe kind of do it. I think The Sting was also a big influence. My dad took me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about like because you veered so far from like how the heist actually happened, what your influences for the heist were. Because whether they're real heists or fictional ones, like movies, TV, books, etc., there's a couple of levels to what you built. There's like the idea, then there's another idea, then somebody else comes. I don't know how much we're allowed to say, but there's a very cool guest star who's also an executive producer who comes in and like maybe is going to be involved for a little while. And like then it takes on another layer of what is this thing. So building that out, how much of that came from, I guess, influenced by other things that you had seen and liked?
Yeah, it's so hard as a writer to say specifically what influenced you because I loved movies so much as a kid and as a high schooler. There was this video shop in my neighborhood, and they had a policy: if you don't love it, you get your money back.
Oh,
And so
that seems like a bad business.
terrible idea if a 16-year-old kid has no shame.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I just come from a world where like you just don't want to pay for anything, so you'll just lie and say like I was talking about this with somebody the other day. I was behind somebody in the grocery store. They were trying to return tomatoes. And I was like, you shouldn't be allowed to return tomatoes. Like, you know what you're buying? They've been loose in your house. Like, what is happening? Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that's very funny. Yeah, I wanted to, I don't know, just have fun with it and have different layers, not only of plot, but also of seriousness. It starts very serious. There are serious consequences, and I can't say specifically The Sting influenced me, but I mean, it did through my life. I'm not sure.
No, I know what you mean.
Like The Sting, but The Sting is, if you haven't seen it, guys, watch it. It's a masterpiece. It might be one of the best scripts ever written. Butch Cassidy, I mean, Newman and Redford, anything they do, but it's got very serious consequences. It's based on a real con or book. Gondor, I think his name is. He's going to kill these people, but they still have fun with it, even though they soak it in these serious stakes. Anyway, the video store. I would just go and rent 3 movies at a time, and then come back and say I didn't love any of them, and rent 3 more. And so I would just plow through movies. I do remember specifically returning Star Wars: A New Hope and The
Okay.
Sting and saying, you know what? I do
I'll
live.
pay for those.
You know,
Okay.
just to be
I
honest, I like
I
to
mean, at
bend
a
the.
certain point, somebody was probably gonna be like, "There's no way he didn't like these, right?" Like they would have found you out on those.
They said love.
Love. Okay. All right. I guess that is harder to prove.
Yeah.
Um, it's not just the heist. I mean, I think like the characters also, you mentioned obviously like the humor can come from the characters, but also the idea of like who these people are that would even get into this type of business slash crime, right? Like it's one thing to be a maple syrup farmer, which already feels like that's a very specific type of person who would do that job. And then to have certain circumstances that gets them to the point where they're willing to like risk all of that to steal in a way their own syrup back. Um, but then you have these other characters outside of the people who are creating the heist, but who are they're foes in other ways. As I said earlier, like I think the politics of this is very interesting. Of the Leonard character who is basically the committee I feel like he's the judge, jury, and executioner being like, you have to do X. We're charging you more and more. You can't even run your business, but I'm a greedy little. I called him a male Karen at one point when I was watching. I was like, he's just very greedy. He's very like he tells on people for no reason. This is a very long way of me asking this question, but when you have characters that are going to commit a crime in a comedy, you obviously want the audience on their side. Do you feel pressure then to make the Leonards of the world that much more worse? To say like this is you even if you don't agree with the crime, this is why you should be on their side. How do you balance that, I guess is
Yeah. Honestly, we actually fought against making Leonard and the other forces too archetypical, mustache twirly villain. And I'm not, I probably could have dialed it back a little more.
I don't know if I would say mustache swirly. I just like I literally wrote down male Karen because he like makes that phone call where he like said,
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't even really know what he's talking about, but he is basically Margot Martindale's character he does not like and is saying she's doing something wrong, has nothing to do with the heist.
It was a process throughout the entire series of the season, calibrating, Ruth symbolizes all these maple syrup farmers. And so we kind of had to do a similar thing with the association, the federation. We had to put all the people's complaints into one person in a way. And we did dial it back in script too. Like he was just too mean, and
Mm.
he does some mean stuff, of course, as you said, and other stuff you haven't said. Um, but we were trying to definitely not make him just a two-dimensional bad guy, trying to give him, and he has a point. The Federation in real life has a point. It is helping farmers, a lot of farmers. It is probably, I don't know numbers, it's probably a minority, a vocal minority who are against it because they want to take their risks. But that's just
Well, that's
risk.
the real Federation. I mean, I
Right.
don't know that the real Federation is doing some of the things that Leonard was doing with the way he
No,
was
no,
raising
that's
prices.
all.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
Federation life.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I do not want to get sued. No, no. We made all that up. But we just we had to, again, kind of summarize all of the complaints and the fears into a fictional character.
Right, right. And I mean, it's a small town, but it feels even smaller because of how in each other's business everyone is. Like even Mike and Ruth having a history I mean, I'm just gonna set this up for the audience because I already called Remy the mastermind, but like Remy has been stealing a little bit, and now he gets this idea to steal more, and he like overhears a conversation Mike is having in a restaurant and goes to Mike because he thinks he's a good person to get in business with, and then Mike calls Ruth, who's already and so like that to me was a really interesting, oh, they already know each other, like there's history here, and then they're trusting this stranger. And so when you're building those relationships, and you already said like they're very different people, is there like a line you need the characters to walk in terms of the trust level? Like how you play with they're in business because they need to be, but they don't trust each other. And how much did you want them to be kind of looking over their shoulders at each other versus straight up sabotaging each other?
It's a great question. Again, I don't know the exact mixture of ingredients. I do want them to be looking over their shoulders at each other, being suspicious, except I also want times when they're not, because you don't want to just all be suspicious. You want some
Mhm.
trust, and then to cut that out, and then a little more trust. And we have that with Ruth and Mike, with Remy and Mike, and also with Ruth and all three of them. They all go back and forth, and I think that was important from the beginning. We wanted it to be not just this unified team doing a heist, but all these squabbling and backdealing behind the scenes among our three. And I think the danger is you'd make them unlikable, all three of them, even in this day of anti-hero, TV. But I think by putting all of their backs against the wall and showing how bad their situation is, you buy a lot of cover for them. So,
Yeah.
by putting Ruth in her circumstances and the other guys in theirs, each individual circumstances, but all kind of being beat down or berated or whatever, not being seen. They're all kind of broken, a little shattered. Um, and that people want to root for those people. So
Yeah.
so you can root for those people, and then you can also understand why they're backstabbing each other, trying to get the thing, because it's so important for Mike to get A, but it's
Right.
so crucial for Ruth to get B, and so you want to root for them all.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
hope.
I'm so cynical that I was like, oh, why would you have partners? Like, at a certain point, they're going to turn on each other to try to cut each other out to be the sole victor. But I think victor's not the right word, but I think giving the history with Mike and Ruth already tells you up front that's not the kind of story you're telling. Like, don't let your imagination get too crazy. Just enjoy the story because like they care about each other already, which is, I think, helpful when you say things like, well, you want them to care about the characters. Well, if they already care about each other, that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Um,
And we only have shot one season, but we have five laid out. So
okay,
hope.
I was going to ask you because I'm not spoiling, no one's getting the ending ruined for them today, but you do leave it. I thought it was going to be one season based on a real heist, but you leave it on an interesting little cliffhanger where, as I was saying, small town, like there's another connection that I didn't see coming
Oh,
between
good.
characters. So, what, how did you, when you arced it out, is it anthological? Is it like some of these characters go on and others don't, or is they all go on in different ways?
Well, if we get a second season,
Right.
if enough people watch, we'll get a second season, and we're going to keep following these three people. All the people you've seen in season one, I think is true. We haven't written season two yet, but we know where it's going. It's going to be following that. At the end, they of the season one, they do something.
Yes.
It's different than what they'd intended, and so
Yes.
season two will be dealing with those consequences, which is kind of how we tried to frame each episode and the first season. They try and solve one problem, but in doing so, they create two more problems
Right.
or three or whatever. It's a hydra in a way. And that's what we're hoping too. Each season will be following them in a new circumstance or world.
Okay. You don't want to see everything coming, but I will say the show opens with, first of all, I had no idea how you tap a tree to get the syrup. So the show opens by showing the audience how the farming process works. And so you're on Ruth's farm, you're seeing the sap come out of the tree, but you're also seeing someone come up to her and be like, you have to stop. Like, there's something happening. And in my head, I was like, well, that's how you steal it. You just aren't really the government official coming in. You're lying and then you're taking it. Obviously, you didn't do that, but I am curious how many different things you thought about for the heist option to ultimately land on what you did. And if you can kind of, without spoiling the actual answer for what you did, explain why that was the best one to go with. This is
Okay.
very hard to do, by the
Yeah,
way. I'm not used to doing it with no spoilers.
yes. We came up with all sorts of ways for them to attempt this heist and to get there. I mean, a lot of the season is preparing for it or trying things and it failing. Um, I'm a researcher. I just when I'm going to start writing something, I want to research everything. So I call it barrel math. I researched the viscosity of maple syrup and water,
Oh,
the freezing temperature, how much it weighs, how much a barrel weighs empty and full. I want to know every possible thing. To then I get my sandbox. Okay, I know these are the rules, and then how to make that. So we experiment with all sorts of different heists and problems on the way. In fact, the season ends. Let's see how I can do this with with a way that is 90% what we eventually landed on, but because of production and cost and time, there was one key element that we didn't get in, which is going to change season two because it was going to be some. I love shows where something's seeded and doesn't feel like a big idea, and then it comes to play
Yeah.
later in episodes or seasons. So I tried to do that. So I'm gonna have to work around that. To answer your question without giving away anything, they do something that is mostly what we had planned after going
Right.
through, myriad options,
Right.
because we wanted to stay true enough. I mean, it's hard to do a heist show based on a real heist and not have a heist.
No, totally. But I mean, there were so many more people involved in the real heist. And then I mean, the real heist story was told in like documentary form. So I didn't know if there were things that you considered and then maybe also dismissed because you were like, I don't want to do it like that. Like, I mean, you already said the real heist was not dramatic enough. But even, I mean, I think it was an episode of Dirty Sexy Money that they was inspired by the heist. I didn't see that episode, so I don't know exactly how they did it, but I would imagine like if you see that, you don't want to do it the same way also, which might cut out some of your options.
It was, yeah, we saw that luckily after we, started researching this stuff. It was that is pretty, as I recall, I haven't seen it in a long time. That was pretty much a documentary, a docudrama about it. And so they focus a lot on, once they were caught and the police work and stuff and working backwards. And that makes it interesting, but that's not the story we
Right.
wanted to tell. Nor do I don't want our heroes in jail for 10 years like some of those guys got.
There. Yeah, not in season one
Yeah.
anyway. I mean, that's true. It does limit. I don't think this is a really big spoiler, but you do kind of start a little bit in the future. Like if everybody turns this show on Friday, is a really I thought it was very cool. I always talk about how I like murder in my comedies, and it does open with a murder and then it flashes back. Um, what did you want to say in terms of like that strong, bold murder opening? Is this like this is where this is what the stakes are for the show, or was there another message in there that maybe we should be thinking about as we watch the show?
I think I that makes me sound much smarter than I am. I just wanted to start with something that grabs people's attention and makes them start asking questions. I think somebody told me this rule, like in network TV, you just answer questions. In streaming and premium cable, you make the audience ask questions. And so it's not just feeding them the answers, it's making them ask questions. And actually, I was really this is a behind the scenes look for you. I was really disappointed that we eventually, after some testing and some editing, we did say 48 hours earlier on a Chiron
Mhm.
after that. I really wanted it to not be, and for people to be confused and say, well, wait, there was a murder in a
Oh,
few seconds, and then we're following this story and be confused. And then
and then when
ideally,
it
it's
comes
nice to,
back in.
yeah, and it's like, oh, I forgot about that whole thing. But
Hmm.
either because I'm not a good enough storyteller or any other number of reasons, audiences didn't care for that, and they really liked it when we just told them it was 48 hours early.
Oh, I'm going to think about that a lot now because I read a lot of thrillers in novels and they do that a lot. And sometimes they don't tell you where you are in time. And I always feel like in the novel, when they don't tell you, I feel like they think they're smarter than the audience, and that drives me crazy. But I feel like on TV, it's less that they think they're smarter and more if you're too focused on that thing, you're missing other things.
That's what I think the testing was doing. It was like people, would go in cold for this testing, and they're like, okay,
Right.
it's a murder mystery. Let's follow some murder.
Oh, yeah. I
And
mean,
they
it
just
is a little, I mean, like for a minute there, you don't know who did it. And then,
yeah. But then then I guess they were, as you said, they were missing the joy or the
yeah.
enjoyment of watching the show because they were still hung up on that thing.
Yeah, yeah. This is going to sound like a really weird question because we're talking about murder, but you brought up comfort TV when you were talking about the Andy Griffith Show and how that is still your comfort show. I'm going to say I don't know if the Sticky falls in a comfort show because of the murder and because of maybe the more serious, but is that important to you? Like the things that you're gravitating towards watching as comfort, do you feel like you want to put some of those elements in the shows that you're making so that some people might call them that type of show?
Yeah, I don't even really care if anything I make is ever comfort or not. I
Right.
would ideally like to make stuff that stands the test of time. At least, I mean, I don't think anyone can these days can expect their show to be last like Andy Griffith. I mean, it's been 64 years or something since it started, and it still resonates with me, and I assume some other people.
Yeah.
I've always said I would rather make one great thing and then bartend or teach or whatever for the rest of my life than make a lot of mediocre things.
Okay.
And I am proud of this show. I'm not sure it's great. I think only time would tell. I think it's very strong, very good, but it's not The Godfather. Those people like Spielberg has made like 5 or 10 great things. I'm so jealous. I would settle for
Well,
one.
I don't think it's fair to compare movies to TV, first of all,
Fair?
or dramas to comedy even. And I know like obviously your show kind of does blend those genres because there is humor in it, but as you said, it's not like set up punchline joke. It's the human comedy that just comes out of like people
Right.
and experiences. Um, but I also think like it's what makes something stand the test of time is like how it hits the audience when it comes out. I love a lot of the things that I saw that Steven Spielberg did when I was a kid. If they were brand new today, I don't think they would hit me the same way. And I think a lot of that is this is partially why I do this podcast and like why we start with what was the past thing, because it hits you a certain way when you're a kid because of where you are. And then you take it with you and it influences what you do later in different ways. But if you then go back and watch it as an adult, your memory of it is already skewed by the nostalgia. So you love it. But if you came in cold today, would you? I don't know. I mean, you might with Andy Griffith because of everything you're talking about. Like you're a father now, so like you might still have those, watch those scenes and watch it from the other perspective and still feel that way. But there have been episodes of this podcast where guests have come on with things that I had never seen before, and I watched it for the first time as an adult, and I'm like, I don't really get it. But I
Yeah.
think part of the reason I don't get it is because I didn't have that formative experience with it.
Yeah. Getting married showed me that, like, you get married, and you're like, okay, wife or husband or partner, um, here's something I love.
Yes.
And one of my things was UHF, the movie with Weird Yankovic.
Okay.
I love that movie so much. I wore through the tape and I had to buy another one. And listen, I still make inside jokes with my sister about it, but my wife watches, she's like, What is this? I'm not gonna finish this. This is ridiculous. And you're right. But I think Andy Griffith, for many reasons, but one is it was already kind of a fairy tale throwback when it was made.
Right.
And as you said, I've grown with it. Like I'm not sure I told you this. When I was a kid, I started calling my dad Pa,
Hmm.
which is what Opie calls his dad, and he still signs his emails that way to me. Like he'll always be my Pa.
That's nice.
Uh, Even though we're from Wisconsin, I usually could call him Dad, of course.
It's
But
nice though. That's like
yeah,
that takes it beyond like, oh, it's this thing I'm watching. Now it's this connection I'm making in the real world and we're
right.
bonding over this thing.
And as we kind of alluded to earlier, I could watch it for Opie as a kid. I could watch it for Opie as a teenager or even as an adult. And now as a father, I want to watch it for different. It's grown with me, and I've grown with it in a way that a lot of shows I don't think are even open to doing that. Not just the age wise, but like Breaking Bad and The Wire, of
Mhm.
course, great TV shows. I've rewatched them a bunch, and I find new things, but I don't find it like I've developed or changed my perspective on the show
Right.
as much. And
Yeah.
this one, yeah,
No, that makes sense. I mean, it's also the type of storytelling, I think. Like when you have a drama that is so steeped in plot, the way that Breaking Bad is. I mean, characters are important, motivations are important, but it's also you're watching him make these
right. You're
terrible
making moves,
decisions.
right?
Yeah, and these moves, and like they're all leading to I th thought an inevitable end. Where I think with sitcoms, or maybe any comedy, I mean, maybe not just sitcoms, but like I feel like there's usually a little bit more wiggle room in what you're finding funny that day, what you're relating to that day, which side story, because it's the A, the B, and the C move around, I think, a little bit more with characters.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's nice. It was almost every sitcom you can just drop in on any episode. It doesn't really matter, with
well, don't
Breaking
tell, I hate hearing that. I'll be honest with you. Like, yes, that's how they were made. That's by design, but it stresses me out. There was a time where a lot of like early, probably like 2011, 2012, or even when you were doing American Housewife, yeah, when you were, it was like 2016, right? So even that time, they networks were doing that where they were dropping episodes out of order just to like hook the audience with what they thought the stronger episodes were. But if you were paying attention, the continuity didn't line up and it drove me bonkers. And then a few of those shows released DVDs with the wrong order, with the air
Oh,
order,
well,
not the
that's
production order. I was like writing to everybody. I was DMing with certain producers. They were like, we're fixing it. And I was like, are you? Because like I bought this thing 3 times and it's still wrong. Um,
I can see that
yeah,
isn't yes, but like with Breaking Bad, any plot-driven drama, as you were saying, like you could drop in for the episode, but you're losing a lot if you. And same, I think the sticky falls in between that. Like, sure, you could just drop in on episode 3, but
you
you're gonna miss a lot.
shouldn't.
Yeah, you miss a lot of the beginning and why things are happening this way.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, you would miss the whole setup. You would miss a couple of key plot points. You'd miss the like who these people are to each other and why it matters. Um,
So don't do that, audience.
yeah,
Watch it.
I don't think you should have said that, but that's okay. I'm here to tell them not to do
No,
that.
I'm just saying, like it's gonna be harder to stand the test. I think you have an advantage as a comedy to stand the test of time because of you can drop in. If I turn
Sure.
on right now, I can watch episode 240 or episode 6, and I'm still getting the same joy out of it.
That's true. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think that's a nice palate cleanser for a lot of the other stuff. Like I still do that where I'll at night be like, I just want to watch something comforting and that I know really well before I go to bed. And like I probably fell asleep in the middle of watching this, so I'm just gonna let the streaming service pick up where I fell asleep, even though I missed a chunk because I was asleep. It doesn't matter. And it should matter, but like I've seen it 100 times, so it doesn't.
Yeah,
Obviously, when you're seeing it for the first, second, maybe even third time, it matters.
yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.
All right, it's time to list where you can find the things that Ed and I discussed on today's episode of Made Possible by Pop Culture. As always, no money has changed hands here. I'm not listing a specific streaming service because of a sponsor deal, because I'm forced to. I'm actually choosing these organically based on which ones I think are the easiest places to find these titles. So, that being said, I always like to start in the past, and today that means The Andy Griffith Show. The Andy Griffith Show has 8 seasons, all available to stream on Paramount Plus. But as Ed brought up in the episode, he really prefers just those first 5 seasons. And those 5 seasons are obviously on Paramount Plus, but they're also available on Peacock, so you do have options. He briefly brought up Seinfeld, that is streaming on Netflix. When he was talking about an influence on the sticky, he briefly brought up the film The Sting. That is unfortunately not streaming, but you can find it to rent on places like Amazon or Apple. Then he also quickly mentioned Weird Al Yankovic's UHF. That is available on Fubo. And of course, The Sticky itself. That's Ed's new comedy, 6 episodes, binge drop on Prime Video beginning December 6th. That's tomorrow if you're listening to this as a brand new today drop episode. If you're listening to it later, well, good for you. It's already out there. You can watch it at any time. Now, I do want to say one thing before I let you go. In my Thanksgiving roundtable, I did bring up a comedy that I enjoyed, but said I wanted to have more murder. I do want to state for the record, I was not talking about The Sticky. I had actually not even seen The Sticky when I made that reference in that recorded episode. However, spoiler alert, next week's episode does feature the creator of the show I was talking about. So you're going to want to stick around for that. We have a brand new episode of Made Possible by Pop Culture. If you've been wondering what I'm talking about, you'll find out. If you like the show, please like, comment, subscribe, follow on social media, tell your friends, and of course, keep coming back for more pop culture discussions every week.